Last night, America was struck by another mass shooting, this time taking place in a Grand Theater in Lafayette, Louisiana. Around 7:30 p.m., John Russel Houser began firing indiscriminately on the audience watching a showing of the film Trainwreck, killing 2 and injuring 9 others. After briefly attempting to flee to his vehicle, he heard police sirens approaching, went back into the theater, and committed suicide. And now, a day after the shooting, the families of those who have been killed, police, law enforcement, we have a lot of questions about his motivations, why he committed the crimes that he did. He's being described as someone with a history of mental illness. He is white, after all. He's a shooter. Yeah. So the mental illness, being called a drifter and things of that sort. We don't know.
A lone wolf.
Is he being called? Let me guess. Is he being called a Christian?
I have not heard that.
Haven't heard that.
Until he is, we'll have to assume that he's an atheist.
Well, he was a self-described, he described himself as a Christian because a lot of it, he had this little manifesto, which I'm sure John's going to get to, but he talked about how being a white Christian man in America.
Yes, that's a good point.
It's difficult. So in fairness, he did identify as a Christian.
Yes, so we have noted now that he's a Christian. I don't want to ever hear
Christianity.
it again.
We're not blaming Christianity.
We're not even going to say Christianity again.
Really?
But anyway, no, it definitely seems like in the case of this shooting, the man, he did have a history of mental illness. He also, we don't have to speculate about his politics. We know from his own writing quite a bit about what he thought about this country, about liberals. We're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, I do want to talk about some of the accounts of those who were in the theater during the shooting, how bizarre it was that he had been sitting for about 20 minutes watching the film and then just began shooting. No altercation, no indication that he was going to do what he ended up doing. And so we have accounts from some of the people who witnessed the shooting firsthand. So Houser settled into the theater's second to last row, which was where Randall Mann's 21-year-old daughter was sitting. Mann's daughter heard the first pops about 20 minutes in, thinking they could have been firecrackers or part of the movie. But she knew something was happening when she saw muzzle flashes, Mann said. She hit the floor and then ran for her life, joining a panicked but controlled, helpful crowd. Another man in the theater told Kiefer Sanders, who was watching a different movie, that there was no argument, nothing going on at all. And a guy just stood up and started opening fire. This is from Kiefer Sanders. The guy was just kind of at ease, just standing there, just shooting. And so there was some investigation, obviously, of where the man had been living. Searches of his hotel room and vehicle turned up wigs, glasses, and other apparent disguises. He also had swapped out the license plate on his car, which would have made it harder to track him if he escaped, providing quite a bit of evidence that he had been planning something of this sort, and it was not simply that he snapped all of a sudden. Certainly bringing a gun for any reason into a theater implies some sort of forethought about the possible use of violence.
That theater, by the way, a gun-free zone.
Yes.
That mall was a gun-free zone.
Yeah. Now, there were 2 police officers in the theater, not in that exact room, but in the larger theater. They reacted to the shots that they heard. By the time they got to that room, he had already killed himself. And so there were police in the area. As I said earlier, after his initial shooting in that one room, he did try to leave, but people say that he turned back when he heard the police approaching. So it does seem like he had planned to do the shooting and then escape, but was unable to.
I like that Bobby Jindal, he raced to the scene and immediately started doing nothing to prevent another thing like this happening.
Mm-hmm. It's more, Jimmy, what he didn't do beforehand, which is allow legislation to go vetoed in Louisiana and push for legislation that was approved. So that's the chickens coming home to roost in a horrible, horrible way. And this is part of Jindal's way of governance. It's everything to accommodate gun owners, which, listen, Louisiana, the license plate says sportsman's paradise, right?
Yeah.
So it's,
that doesn't mean
it's
football.
Fishing and hunting. No, it doesn't mean football. It did for a while, but it doesn't now. So I think that, that you can't sit here and blame Bobby Jindal, but gun laws haven't changed. And as a matter of fact, if anything, they've been relaxed in a state like Louisiana since he's been there. And then these things happen. And this gun, this man was rejected. He was not allowed to have a gun. He did not pass the background check, the mental check to have this gun. So, something fell through the cracks.
So in looking for motivation, because this is the first thing I think everyone would want to say, what's the motivation behind someone doing something like this, even before we get to the gun control problem, or then say the political affiliations and all that stuff, so we can say what drove him to believe these things? then what's the motivation specifically for this theater? What's the motivation for which people he chose? Because it seemed indiscriminate. Because we talked about Dylan Roof, there was specific church he specifically targeted. Then once he was there, he had a reason for specifically targeting those particular types of churchgoers. So this, I'm not sure, has come together yet. But at this point, it doesn't really matter because we're going to get to the whole terrorism versus lone shooter stuff from the reactions of who we would expect to say those things.
You know, you bring up Dylan Roof, entirely unrelated, guys, but Dylan Roof, one of the most amazing things about that horror was that he sat for an hour with these people, and then you see this guy who sat in the movie theater for 20 minutes, spent 20 minutes watching Amy Schumer, watching that movie, and looking at all these people eating popcorn, just sitting there, and then stands up and starts firing. So
and apparently the two, I've read that the two that actually died in the shooting were those sitting directly in front of him. So people that he had seen, he had been sitting right behind them for 20 minutes. Yeah, it is, as you say, it's amazing to try to imagine how, even if you were crazy or even if you were homicidal, that you could spend time right around these people and then still not back down from the insane thoughts that you had. Yeah, and so as you were saying, look, I don't blame Bobby Jindal in particular. I blame the sort of person like Bobby Jindal who does not care whatsoever about doing anything to strengthen gun control, to make it even 1% less likely that something like this happens. In any particular shooting, we can't say that if a certain law had been changed or looked a certain way, or if a background check had been conducted in a different way, that the shooting wouldn't have happened. We're not saying that this particular crime could have been averted, that it wouldn't have happened, the tragedy, but that we don't want future ones to happen. And in a country where we can't go a week, we're moving on from Chattanooga. It's been a week since Chattanooga. We can't even have unique shootings anymore. As someone tweeted, in this country now, when you say, "Do you remember that theater shooting?" you then have to follow it up with, "Which one are you talking about?"
Amazing, and he was just convicted a week ago, right? James
exactly,
Holmes?
James Holmes. Yes.
Maybe it's longer than a week ago, but it was very recent, so a week or 10 days ago. Same thing,
Can I blame Bobby Jindal? Yeah, sure. Because of the laws that he's changed, or the lax gun laws that he's implemented to get an A+ rating from the NRA, when this guy didn't get when he was rejected with a background check for whichever gun he was trying to get at that point, whatever time of year, last year, which month that was, what other shooting was prevented because he didn't get the gun right then?
That's a good point.
And then who's alive right now that was in a theater that he would have targeted because it was a different movie that came out in April?
Yeah.
It does save lives. We don't know which ones those are because those things never happened.
That's a good point.
We can only say it was bound to happen. I don't know, but if we strengthen things, less of these can happen.
Yeah, well, that's true. But it's not just Jindal, and I can't believe I'm sitting in a chair
he's an example of many
defending
that do the same.
Bobby Jindal. But the point is, you hit the nail on the head with that NRA thing, because he had to get the A+ from the NRA. So it's kowtowing to these special interests, to the NRA that has disproportionate power in Washington, as do other PACs, but theirs is disproportionate as well, Jimmy.
And the people from the NRA that give Bobby Jindal the money, or who are threatening him to primary him and all those things, they are they're Donald Trump. All right, so if you got to meet those people, that's who they are. They're big jerks like him who don't really care about the country. They only care about money and themselves. They're so crazy that they don't care how many people get killed in their own country as long as they can still keep selling guns. Yeah. And that's who these people are. And they are pulling the strings on guys like Bobby Jindal, guys like the whole Senate and Congress, not just Bobby Jindal. It just happened in his state this week. But the whole goddamn country is afraid of the NRA. And it's just money. So that's Trump keeps revealing the dirty underbelly of how every one of these senators and people who want to be president used to have to come licking his boots, right? Well, he also have to go licking the boots of people just like Trump in other businesses, not just Wall Street, not just real estate, but also in gun manufacturing, oil. These are all creepy guys who don't care about the country, that these people, in order to get elected, have to lick their boots, and then their strings get pulled. And you wonder why 90% of the country wanted some kind of gun legislation after Sandy Hook, and we didn't get it. You know why? Because the guys with the money pulled the strings, so we're not going to get it. So that revealed that we have a completely corrupted, out-of-control government that does not respond to the wills of the people.
Yeah.
I know you're going to move on, but you're going next part. But because of that, so once we have that, the reason the blame thing is always the problem. Who was this guy? Which political leanings he had? Which both sides kind of don't like that argument anymore. Is because we're not even focusing on solving the problem. It's just focusing on not getting the blame
Right.
so they can get reelected again or continue to keep those things. You know, we're not worried about the solutions. It has to be the surface level of don't blame me because I want to make sure that I don't get in any trouble with this because I might not get elected again. It goes back to concern about your own ass and not the dead people.
And I too, like JR, know that you want to move on. But one quick thing, because it's a political, and we're on to the political conversation here. This is an opportunity for someone like Bobby Jindal, who is not going to make the debate, who is not going to. This tragedy happened in his state, and it lays bare a huge problem. So a politician with any kind of balls would say, hey, you know what? We have to rethink this. He can get a segment of the population to glom onto him and be interested in him because it's a terrible opportunity because it's a tragedy, but it's still an opportunity for him to do something and set himself apart from the field. He hasn't done that at all.
Imagine if there was a guy like Donald Trump, right, who had that bombastic personality and didn't care, who was anti-NRA.
Yeah.
Right.
He could maybe turn people's opinion around on the NRA in the United States. We need a bombastic jackass like Trump. We can't have guys like, Ben Nelson or whoever.
Right.
He also has he could single-handedly match all of the NRA's donations. When they don't actually give that much money for the amount of influence they end up having in Washington.
That's what I mean. That's a disproportionate
Exactly.
influence.